Shalom. I give honor and glory praises to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahushua, Ba'ashem, HaKadosh, Dabbar, the student, elders, apostle, great minister, and tongues, this church, sincerity, I teach the students help with the aspect of work and service. It's going to be another day to bright title, keep yourselves from idols. So I'm speaking to myself first and foremost, right? And I'm going to be in 1 John 5:21, which reads, little children, keep yourselves from idols, right? 12, right? And when you're going to wear idols, it is a simple statement. Keep yourself from idols, right? Idols represent a false god, right? The image of a heathen god, right? The image of a heathen god. The word image, when you look it up, means the representation of a person or thing, right? The likeness, right? The likeness. So we have to keep ourselves from the likeness of the heathen power, right? We cannot, put on their we cannot put on their we cannot, for example, we cannot have their name, which really yeah, which we're not really their name, but we can really have their yeah, for example, like you have some is like that is named after Jesus, right? You know, like you have Israelite who name are they in for example Spanish Jesus, but in English it's spelled Jesus. That's example, right? And then you have that all going back to so this is why that's an example of a having the likeness of a heathen god. Okay, this is why when the prophets and the just Israelites in general, their name always had Yah because it started with their name started without power name Yahweh, right? Like Jeremiah, which was the name of Jeremiah. Okay, because there's no J's in Hebrew, right? So that's an example, right? And then also, not partaking in the practices of worshiping these heathens, right? Sacrificing to these heathens, right? And that's the number one commandment. All right, going all the way back to the John chapter. Which was the number one command, right? Thou should not have no other God before me, right? That was the number one commandment for Jake to follow, right? Thou should not have any other God before me. And that goes back to keeping ourselves from idols, right? Because the scripture said that Yahweh's a jealous power, meaning what that he don't like, us worshiping other power. He doesn't like, his us going to honor and sacrifices to these false powers, right? You know. So Israelites just came back to worshiping the true power, right? We have to keep ourselves from idols, and that goes back to what, not taking the mark of the beast, okay? Not taking the mark of the beast, which goes back to Revelation 13, okay? Because there's gonna come a time where we're gonna have to take a mark in order to buy or sell, right? Says Revelation 17 says that no man might buy or sell save only he. So only this person is save he that has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Okay. And that word we always say so the name the mark goes back to the microchip, okay, the RFID, right? The Neuralink, all right. And that is that mark goes back to a false god, an idol, right? It goes back to the wicked. It goes back to Satan, right? And the heathens, right? Trying to put their, which go back to their technology, right? Goes back to trusting in Esau technology, trying to put their mark, inside you, right? Trying to basically make you theirs, okay? Trying to remove Yahweh Shashah spirit away from you, okay? All right. So I'm gonna close here by giving all honor, glory, and praises to Yahweh by Shem Yahshua by Shem Yahweh. The next conversation one. So this is why we have to be mindful, what we watch, we be mindful what we listen to, because idols really could be we can make anything our idols, right? We could people, can be idols, right? Different just things can be idols, right? Things you worship, right? So you just be mindful and constantly examine yourself, whether you be in the faith or you be in the truth, whether you're a worshiper whether you're worshiping Yahweh Bashar and truth is certainty. All right, so I'm gonna officially close it here by giving all the praises to Yahweh Bashar and that's some place on.